welcome everyone to today's webinar, Rescheduled Realities, Redefining Cannabis Manufacturing. I'm Brian Gilbert, and I'm thrilled to have you all here for the fifth installment of NCIA's Industry Essentials multi-part webinar series. Over the past 4 episodes, we've explored the potential impact and implications of cannabis rescheduling on various facets of the industry, and today we turn our focus to the profound changes which could occur to the manufacturing sector. This session is led by our renowned Cannabis Manufacturing Committee and aims to provide you with the critical insights and practical guidelines to help your business adapt and thrive in this new landscape. We'll delve into the future of manufacturing, of post-rescheduling, evolving the GMP and regulatory requirements, and the specific impacts on extracts and concentrates. Additionally, we'll discuss the potential entry of big pharmaceutical companies into the market and share best practices for maintaining non-pharmaceutical quality. This webinar is designed to equip cannabis manufacturers with the knowledge and tools needed to navigate these upcoming changes, ensure compliance, and continue producing high-quality cannabis extracts that stand out in an ever-growing and competitive market. And our goal, as always with these webinars, is to create a forum where member and non-member businesses can come together to discuss potential setbacks and solutions. So don't hesitate to post those questions to the Q&A board throughout the program. To kick things off, we're going to change it up a little bit, and I'm thrilled to introduce 2 prominent figures in the cannabis industry who will set the stage for today's discussion. Aaron Smith, CEO and co-founder of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and Ben Larson, founder at Vertosa and current vice chair of NCIA's board of directors, will be leading an engaging fireside chat to kick things off. In this segment, Aaron and Ben will discuss the real impacts of cannabis rescheduling, the latest legislative developments, including some impending regulatory bills that we see down the pipeline and updates to the recent Farm Bill, and the importance of self-regulation as we prepare for future regulatory changes. So great to see you here today, Aaron and Ben. I hope you all have been having a great week. We're going to kick things off with a question for Aaron, sort of following up on his last update for episode 1, where we kicked this series off. So Aaron, from your perspective as the CEO and co-founder at NCIA, can you elaborate on what rescheduling does and doesn't do for cannabis businesses? Oh, you're muted, Aaron.
Oh, thank you, Brian, and thanks to all the panelists and everybody who's on the webinar today. Yeah, this is a really exciting time for anybody who's watching marijuana reform, and certainly for anybody in the cannabis business. And just to kind of lay the groundwork for what rescheduling is, the way that our federal drug control system works is we have the Controlled Substances Act passed in 1970 that classifies drugs based on their potential for abuse and their potential medical value. And there's a classification system 1 through 5, 1 being drugs that have no medical value and or are declared by the federal government as having no medical value and a high potential for abuse, all the way down to 5, which is low potential for abuse and a medical value. So Schedule 1 drugs are drugs like LSD, peyote, heroin, and unfortunately, cannabis, marijuana, and THC. Schedule 2, for example, is a drug with high potential for abuse, but medical value. That would be cocaine, fentanyl, and then all the way down to 5, where you have codeine cough syrup, is an example of one of the drugs there. So the move now is the potential move that's been recommended by FDA is to finally acknowledge the medical value that cannabis has and its relative low abuse potential, and move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Schedule 3 is where Marinol resides, so it makes sense that if artificial synthetic THC can be Schedule 3, you would think that the natural version should be in Schedule 3. And to be clear, NCIA's view is that cannabis should not be in the Controlled Substances Act at all. It should be removed, regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. But we do see this as a great step in that direction. And what this will do is acknowledge the medical value of cannabis, allow for more research. It does reduce penalties. The penalties get lower and lower as you move down the schedule. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't legalize the industry as we know it. Our industry will be manufacturing and distributing a Schedule 3 substance outside of compliance with outside of the guidelines of federal law. Because it's important to note that these substances that are on the schedule matrix, the rubric, need to be approved by the FDA, and then can only be dispensed through pharmacies under strict conditions under the prescription of a doctor. So of course, medical adult use states that, and even medical states that have an industry as we know it today, will not be going through the new drug approval process, which is $1 billion, upwards of $1 billion. And so it's really important that there's going to be state guidelines given that respect state laws. One notable thing that it does do is that it does eliminate the burden of 280E on the industry, because 280E says that you cannot deduct expenses associated with trafficking a Schedule 2 or 3 substance. So as long as the FDA recommendation is followed, it'll move to Schedule 3. That resolves the 280E issue, which I think is a wonderful thing for the industry and will have a great economic impact all the way down the cannabis ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I know we had exact questions along those lines on Tuesday's call, episode 4 of this. So I'm glad that we were able to set the stage and clarify what it does and will not do explicitly before we dive deeper into today's program. So Ben, bringing you into the conversation, as a pioneering leader in the cannabis manufacturing sector and CEO at Vertosa, a leading beverage provider across the industry, we wanted to get your expertise on this. And specifically, I know that you've been touching a lot about this on your podcast as well over the last few weeks. But as a leader in the space, how do you see this shifting, influencing operational practices and business strategies for manufacturers within the industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, I'd like to kind of start by reiterating what Aaron said, simply because it's kind of new news. CANRA, the Cannabis Regulators Association, kind of publicized the comments that they had left with the rescheduling open comment period. And so I'll just read Jillian's post really quick. So guidance is needed on how federal priorities, including enforcement priorities, will change under the proposed rescheduling. Guidance is needed on how federal agencies will engage with states and territories under the proposed rescheduling. Guidance is needed on how state governments can interact with each other under the proposed rescheduling. Guidance is needed on how research processes and protocols will change under the proposed, and there's only 2 more, I promise. Guidance is needed on how to regulate cannabinoids that appear in 2 different places on the schedule. And then guidance is needed on how the proposed rescheduling will impact banking and finance. So all this to say is we need guidance, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But there are a few things that we can presume might happen or may happen. And one of those things is just stricter adherence to good manufacturing practices. And that's something that we've, as an ingredient company in the space, adopted very early. In fact, I'm proud to report that we just passed our new GMP inspection at a 99.5% passing rating. Our team is very happy about that. But what did it take to get there? And this kind of speaks to a lot of the self-regulation that various coalitions are speaking to right now. But quality control, facility standards, documentation, traceability, training, and keeping your personnel up to date. So it's a heavy investment into just really playing by the book. And just to focus on quality control, it's quality control under GMP, which might be a requirement. Schedule 3, sure, they may say that, okay, the state systems that have been set up are okay, keep operating under that, but everyone should be operating under GMP. And if you want to participate in the actual Schedule 3 supply chain, then you have to go in a line with pharmaceuticals, which is a heavier level of GMP called CFR 210 and 211. Anyways, you basically have to write the instruction manual to guide your team to not only produce the products, but to clean the equipment, to shut the facility down at night. Like it's a high level of detail that you have to really think about. all to ensure that every product that you ship out your door is hyper consistent. And so that's kind of what we have focused on over the years, and what I would recommend that people do kind of in advance of this guidance coming out.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think that we really covered the meat of what we wanted to in the side of the setting the stage segment here. And I think your answer, Ben, really honestly is a great transition to bring in the rest of the panel here. So we can sort of broaden the conversation and build off of what you just said of the importance of coalitions and self-regulation. So with that, why don't we welcome the remainder of the panel just to sort of piggyback off of and build off of that response as well. I'm really excited to introduce Carla Rodriguez from EQO Insight and the really dedicated committee organizer for the Cannabis Manufacturing Committee this year. So with that, Carla, I know that we wanted to sort of set the stage for the panel discussion by giving a little bit of a higher level overview of some of the recent developments surrounding the Chevron ruling and how that might factor into the conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you to give a quick intro of yourself, what you're going to be bringing to the panel, and maybe turn it right over to Paula for that high level overview. Then we'll dive right into the meat of the conversation with the rest of the panelists.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Aaron and Ben, for that insightful discussion. Frequent and often confusing regulatory changes is something that most people in the cannabis industry are very familiar with. If you spend any time on LinkedIn, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I would like to start off with Paula and kind of get an overview of like, what are some of the other regulations that businesses should be aware of? What do they cover? And how are cannabis businesses affected by these?
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with this exciting panel and with all of the participants. So, okay, I thought I would just kind of step back and give an overview of the regulatory landscape we deal with. So, we have the Controlled Substance Act that's administered by the Drug Enforcement Administration, the CSA with the DEA, and then we have the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that is administered by the Food and Drug Administration, so the FDCA and the FDA. Okay, so the CSA regulates both medical and recreational drugs. So, and as Aaron mentioned, the CSA divides the drugs into groups based on medical utility and potential for abuse and dependence. So the DEA is charged with, and this is like, I think really important to always keep in mind because there's so many regulators that we have to deal with. The DEA is charged with controlling the distribution of controlled substances to prevent their misuse, as opposed to the FDA that is charged with quality. So to do this under the CSA, it specifically says every person who produces, distributes, or dispenses any controlled substance or who proposes to engage in any of those activities must register with the DEA. So likely DEA registration is coming down the pike. It's also under the CSA, this will be very interesting, controlled substances in Schedules 2 through 4 must be provided directly to an ultimate user by a medical practitioner or dispensed pursuant to a prescription. So that's going to be interesting. So, of course, many substances regulated by the Controlled Substance Act are also subject to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and the FDA regulates food, drugs, and cosmetics. So, and under the FDCA, the FDA is charged with protecting consumers from unsafe or ineffective drugs. So that's more the quality stuff. So they want to make sure the product does what it says it does, contains what it says it has, and then just kind of general health and safety process and protocols, all along the manufacturing, storage, et cetera, chain of, the supply chain. So marijuana is classified as a drug, so it will be subject to the FDCA. And as other panelists are going to talk about, it's pretty rigorous and cumbersome and expensive. But I will mention this because everybody wants to know about interstate commerce. So it specifically says, and it says this in the, in the proposed rule, until you have an FDA approved drug interstate commerce will still be prohibited since only FDA-approved drugs can, quote, be legally introduced or delivered for introduction into interstate commerce. So, and I'm just going to address, everybody's heard about the Chevron deference overruling, which was amongst regulatory lawyers, just kind of really more of a, I don't know, just something you deal with. But I know there's a lot of confusion about if there's going to be effect on cannabis and the regulators that we are subject to. And I will say the short answer is no, we don't have, it will have no effect on us. And here's why. First of all, the Supreme Court made clear in its ruling that LOPR does not apply where Congress has expressly delegated decision-making authority to administrative agencies. It only applies where agencies have relied on statutory ambiguities to make law. And the CSA and the FDCA have like no ambiguities. The agencies that work under express delegation, so are not going to be affected. So for instance, the CSA, Congress expressly delegates determination to schedule, reschedule, and deschedule a substance to the DEA. And it also goes on to state that courts must defer to the DEA on its, rescheduling, descheduling decisions. And the courts have to accept the DEA's interpretation of the CSA. And lastly, that DEA fact-finding is conclusive. And of course, scheduling, rescheduling, descheduling are fact-finding. So, and it's really the same thing for the FDA. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Paula, for that breakdown. I'm sure there's more than one listener taking a quick sigh of relief that it's not quite the end of the world with all these like regulatory changes. I think sometimes in trying to prepare for the future, we kind of create this fear feedback loop among the industry. And while we can't predict the future as much as we want to, our crystal balls are still under development. I think a better use of our time is looking at other industry leaders and seeing what they're doing now, like what protocols, what tools they're using, what kind of testing they're doing to implement into their operations that are technically not required by regulations, but contribute to quality products. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to Harrison, looking at the pre-roll industry, and then after that to Annamaria.
Thanks, Carla. Yeah, so my name's Harrison Bard. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Custom Cones USA. We're the most trusted supplier of pre-rolled cones and other paper products. But in addition to that, we also sell all of the machines a company would need to manufacture pre-rolls, as well as the packaging. And on the machine side, we have small tabletop machines for your mom and pop and small local cannabis dispensaries and producers, all the way up to automated machines for larger producer processors. And there's a lot of uncertainty, especially around compliance testing. So since we service customers in all states, we have to make sure that our products are compliant in every state in Canada, as well as all over the world. So we're just taking the strictest regulations in terms of heavy metals, the types of heavy metals, as well as the limits, pesticides, microbials, and creating the strictest standards and testing all of our products to those levels. And then there's even states that are adding new heavy metals, which are almost impossible to have passed, like chromium. That's been causing a big issue. It was in New York, and then regulators actually removed that. But in Missouri, that is still causing an issue. And these type of changes are constantly coming and going, and is causing a big headache for manufacturers. So we always recommend you really thoroughly vet your raw material suppliers. And then one interesting thing is that there is no regulations for rolling papers or blunt wraps or any of these type of smoking accessories. So we're placing all of these regulations on ourselves to ensure that our clients are compliant. But if you're not vetting your supply chain partners where you're getting your raw materials from, you could be running in the dark and exposing yourself to a lot of risk.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. My name is Annamaria Barajas. I am the VP of Strategic Planning for the Fischer Group. So we are a firm based out of Southern California that helps commercial kitchens and cannabis operators purchase and source the equipment that they need. I personally am certified and trained in food safety best practices, and I have experience with product development and manufacturing processes. So I think when we're talking about, good manufacturing processes and the idea of self-regulation, really the idea is that there's multiple benefits here. Not only are we by using GMPs, creating a product that's going to be safe for consumers to use. But we're also protecting ourselves, right? The manufacturers, because when you're reducing the amount that is wasted or spoiled, you're saving money. When you preserve the product quality and integrity, you're protecting your brand's reputation. So like an example of that would be for anybody cultivating, processing cannabis, how are you storing and transporting your flower? So, we put so much thought into crossbreeding these strains and cultivating, getting all these features, but then we need to put as much thought into the after part, right? Of how are you holding it? How are you handling it? And how are you transporting this? So things to consider are, what materials are you using to store your cannabis product, right? Are those materials deemed safe by a regulatory agency, let's say like by the FDA, that they're safe for direct contact with an ingestible substance like cannabis? I like to say that, flower deserves so much better than turkey bags and cardboard boxes and Home Depot tubs, right? So, there's proper effective storage available. And really the key to that are those tight fitting covers, because that's really what's going to help prevent cross-contamination of any substances getting into the flower, but also going to help preserve or limit airflow, to then preserve the quality of the flower. So I know another major thing to consider, I think, is temperature control, right? Are you maintaining the proper environment? And generally with cannabis products, I think it's going to be a cool environment. But, are we storing everything in the right temperature range? If things get out of range, you get the possibility for bacterial growth and whatever, but you also get maybe spoilage and you get degradation of your products. So.
Yeah, thank you, Annamaria. That's a really good point. And in addition to just how your product is stored, I also think it's important to look at how it's being transported. If your facility is handling all these things, they're controlling temperature, but then you put it into a truck that's driving for 6 hours in heat or cold, whatever it may be, how is that going to affect your product? I think that's something really important to look into.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the other kind of elephant in the regulation room is the difference between hemp and cannabis. These two industries are on opposite sides of the regulatory spectrum, right? Cannabis is overregulated, hemp is underregulated. So how do we bring these two closer together, and what can we do to have the greatest impact to that change? And I'll pass that to James.
Thank you, Carla. I'm James Granger. I'm the Chief Political Officer for the Clear Clientele Capital Group. We're a manufacturer in about 12 states. Prior to this political world, I've been running operations for about 10 years in multiple states, building labs, developing products, really kind of working from the ground up and following that lovely trend of we don't know what we're quite doing yet, and so we're making it up as we go. It's been a fun chase, but it's an interesting place we're at right now. To go back 50 years and say hemp and cannabis are against each other just sounds ridiculous. And it is. What we're looking at here in the future is moving to cannabinoid regulation as a whole, something we should have been doing a while ago. Now, one of the things that we had to struggle with was we didn't know. So there was an overabundance of rules and regulations out of an abundance of caution and unknown, which is understandable. But as we've gone through the maturation and development of this industry, we're showing that the sky isn't really falling yet. We haven't had huge illicit operators of multinational crime organizations come in. We haven't had, people dropping dead in the streets. We have absolutely had some mold, mildew, contamination problems, and that speaks to this GMP type issue. We need to move towards this. One of the interesting things when we started in a lot of states, and operators will know this, due to setback limits, due to rules, we weren't given the best warehouses. We weren't given GMP capable facilities. We were given the dredges. We were given the extras. We were given the back ends of the last lot of the thing as far away from a potential school or bus stop that we could get. And so we've been struggling with that, building up from there. Also, we never had the benefit of a 280E write-off. We never could say all this beautiful equipment, all these wonderful GMP things. We couldn't afford those. We simply couldn't. So we couldn't write them off. So now what we're seeing is, and this is from a marijuana perspective, and I know Ben has a different perspective here. We've kind of, we started on two different levels, where we were over-regulated, I think, and to a degree, there were bad actors, not Ben, of course, but other bad actors on the lower end of the unregulated space. So it's time to kind of bring that to a middle. And I think we can do that through working towards GMP, working with our regulatory friends, but really explaining and seeing how we got here. There's, trust me, in no uncertain terms, would I love to be able to shut my lab down for about a month, get to GMP standards. Unfortunately, if I close my doors for a day, we're out of business. So we're in a real tough crossroads, but I can assure you that all good actors in the cannabis space, and I say that really significantly, all good actors are working towards that GMP because we do want to have consistency towards the future. Other industries, there's not required testing for, your local granola bar. There's no state agency coming in and pulling samples off your shelf. They are responsible for having a GMP facility. They're responsible for their own internal testing. And we really do need to be treated like any other business. And I think we're getting to that level. And thanks to the hemp emergence, kind of brings a lot of these conversations up to the front.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, right? The cannabis industry hasn't been given all of the exact same tools that these other industries that are way further ahead in terms of quality have been given. Like it's not the same starting point. And GMP is something that people always say, like, that's where you should start, get GMP certified. But what does that actually entail? And like, how realistic is it? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, James, and then Ben, you mentioned it earlier, but what does that entail? How realistic is it? Or maybe a better question is like, what's the first step a company can take to start towards that GMP certification?
Well, the concepts of GMP aren't exactly too far away, I think, from the manufacturing side. We do take into some of the things that Ben mentioned in terms of how your machines clean, SOPs and all that. Unfortunately, it's been the state regulators and the CDPHE here in Colorado and the Marijuana Enforcement Division that have been responsible for that. And I think it's time we take a little bit more proactive work. And to that, I'll pass it on to the others here.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think looking at, like you said, Carla, what industries are already operating and have some of these protocols that we can adapt into cannabis. And where I come from in the food service space, that's, I think, a really clear example where, there are food safety protocols, there are kitchen protocols for sanitation and hygiene. And a lot of these, I think, we can take into cannabis, alter them and, adapt them to our processes, but that it's not completely starting from scratch.
Harrison, if you want to go.
Yeah, so the basics of having like a GMP process is coming up with something called a quality management system. And what's going to be within there is stuff regarding personnel. So making sure that your people are properly trained, but also making sure that they have proper hygiene as well as PPE. And that's proven to be really important in the industry, as any deaths associated with cannabis manufacturing have all revolved around PPE. Then you're going to want to make sure that your premises and equipment are up to date. The states are setting a lot of regulations around that. You're going to want to make sure that all of your equipment is appropriately designed. So there's a lot of certifications in terms of like CE compliance and making sure that the equipment is safe to be plugged in and running, making sure that you're keeping these things maintained and calibrated. And these standards may change based off if it's like a piece of weighing equipment versus piece of processing equipment. You're going to want to make sure that you have things in your quality management system about raw materials. So where you're sourcing them from, that they're coming from approved suppliers, as well as how you're receiving them, identifying them, storage, keeping them stored, handling them, sampling, testing, all stuff like that. Anything regarding production, you're going to want to have really strict SOPs. Make sure you have batch records. So that's a really easy thing a company could start with, is detailing SOPs. If they don't have that, they're going to have inconsistent products and they might have employees manufacturing things against the way they want them to. So, start with SOPs, and then batch testing is also really important. A QC process is extra work, but that's going to ensure that the quality of the items leaving your building meet your expectations. So a really good quality control process is also important there. Packaging and labeling, that's what I think a lot of cannabis companies are most familiar with, because that's where a lot of the laws are around. So you're probably set there, but you do want to make sure that all of your packaging and labeling is accurate, clear, and compliant, as well as documentation and record keeping. So all of this information that I'm talking about, you're going to need to store that, have records of it. So if you're ever audited, you could prove that you are complying with all of this stuff. And then you're going to want to have a continuous improvement process as well. This is a key component. It's called something called CAPA. So it's corrective and preventative actions. And so having a plan in place to find issues and then fix them is another key component that is extra work. And like James said, a lot of companies can afford this, but essentially to roll this out properly, you either need to have really highly trained employees doing your manufacturing, which most companies do not, or you then need to have a compliance team, operations team sitting on top of your core manufacturing team members. They're going to be a lot more skilled, more educated, and on working on these type of projects that don't touch the product. And so it is an extra cost to a small business, which can be very tough.
I'd say that there's a huge benefit to doing it, and it is, it is costly to do this, especially from a facility standpoint, like to have a clean room before you enter a production facility and kind of implementing all those things. But what it does provide you as a business leader is peace of mind from two aspects, really. One, the consistency and the quality of the product. When you start putting in all these handles on the process, it gives you that much more assurance that the product that's going out the door won't be recalled in the future and, be essentially negative press at the end of the day, or even worse. The other aspect is that, when we run small teams or lean teams, there's critical points of failure within the team. If someone all of a sudden leaves, you have a function that no longer is taken care of. And if all those details aren't written down in a manual, essentially, then it leaves you open to some risk there. And so I've been really appreciative of what GMP has done for us. We even recently completed a mock recall, and this is what really contributed to our score, is that we identified, quote unquote, a batch that had lead contamination, and we had to literally go through the process of what it would do, what it would be to recall that. So we contacted every potential customer that we serve, and we had to, first, give them the disclaimer that this was a drill, but then go through the process of reclaiming all that product and really ensuring that we had our arms completely wrapped around it, that we knew every single person that it may have impacted. And so going through that, we had a bunch of corrective actions that we wanted to do as a team, so that if it did happen in the future, we would know exactly what we needed to do, who was responsible for what. And it's just that level of thinking that helps you build that much stronger of a business.
Thank you, Ben and Harrison, for that those thorough answers. I think also just want to add one more thing about SOPs. A rule of thumb that I always try to stick to is, when someone picks up your SOP, someone with no experience or maybe very little experience should be able to complete the procedure, should be able to complete the process. That's how you know that you have a solid SOP with all the details you need, and that it provides, transparency, at least internally, to how everything should be done to, again, as Ben was saying, have that consistent product every time. All right, well, I want to, before we move into the Q&A section, I just wanted to ask all of the panelists, what, maybe in like 30 seconds or less, what is a key takeaway that you want the audience to walk away with after listening to this webinar? Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I could jump in. So I think the key takeaway is there's still a lot of uncertainty, but it's really prudent to just start being as strict as possible and putting all of these regulations on yourself. Look to other industries like the food and beverage industry, where there is these regulations in place already, and try to work towards that. Cannabis is very different, so we're actually working with ASTM on trying to come up with different specifications, because smoking flower is not the same thing as eating a cannabis product. So there are going to be different regulations, but in the meantime, just be as strict as possible so you are best prepared for the future.
Excellent point. Go ahead, James.
Harrison hit the nail on the head there. I think it was almost all the points, but yes, participate. Look at this as your chance now as a cannabis operator to start getting ahead of these things. Changes are coming. You know, the heart of this is rescheduling and Schedule 3. While, you know, we're not going to be pharma anytime soon. I really don't think that's a lot of money and a lot of product development on that, like we've mentioned. Start the process, look into the other industries, take precedent. Don't wait on your regulators to tell you what to do in your state. Because as this grows bigger than them, they're going to be taking on ASTM standards. They're paying more attention to these type of things. And ASTM is a volunteer consensus organization. It's not that much to join, and it's really well informed by people from all over the world. As we develop these standards, we're looking at international acceptance. We're looking at growth in a huge way. And if you get left behind, it's going to cost a lot more later to start playing catch up. So get on it now.
Thanks, James. Annamaria?
Yeah, I think going off of what Harrison and James have just said, you know, don't look at GMPs or self-regulation as a punishment or a burden, right? You know, this is something that's going to be beneficial for all businesses. Putting some thought into this, you know, establishing these processes is only going to be a benefit from product safety standpoint to quality standpoints, but also in regard to building your brand as a strong brand, you know, protecting your brand reputation. You know, when people consume your product and they're like, hey, this is always really good, they might not know it's because of GMP, but that's what is causing that. So.
Thank you, Annamaria. Anyone else have anything to add?
I'd like to add something. So in addition to all of this great self-regulatory and compliance practices that people are sharing, you know, there's something called the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, and it applies to the sale of goods, and cannabis is a good. And it applies to every business all along the chain. And it's really important to be aware of all the, well, I think it's really important from two perspectives. One, you want to make sure your contracts comply with the UCC, because the UCC it applies to cannabis. I mean, to the extent there are state regulations or federal stuff that comes in and also regulates, those apply. But the UCC is a lot broader. You know, it covers placing orders. When is an order firm? When can you change it? You know, what's the standard for, you know, were the products what you ordered, for rejecting, for you know, getting your money back. There's so much really important stuff that is so important along this chain that, you know, and maybe some of you have experienced the hard way. If you don't deal with it, well, there's going to be confusion. But if you ever go to court, a court is going to use the UCC, and it's always best for you to determine your contract than to leave it to a court. So I think it also helps in this whole analysis of what do I need to think about as a manufacturer or a processor, and then how do I make sure that my contracts actually reflect it, from whom I purchase and to whom I sell.
Thank you, Paula. Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, just really quick, some tactical advice. You know, if you really do want to just jump in and get started. Harrison mentioned QMS earlier. That's quality management system. These are like software packages that you can sign into. And I found that when we were on board, the simple act of onboarding onto a QMS is so thorough that it really walks you through that kind of that foundation of creating all the necessary SOPs. You know, other than that, there are consultants that you can call. They can come out and do just a trial walkthrough and let you know where all the corrective actions would be without there being, you know, kind of an authority in the room to make you feel nervous about them knowing what's going on. And then finally, feel free to reach out to me. Myself and my team would be happy to help just kind of guide you on getting started.
Thank you, Ben. All right, we'll move on to Q&A. We've got a couple submitted. The first one from Murray says, what can we expect in terms of child-resistant packaging requirements? Can we hope for any kind of specific regulatory standard?
I can chime in just from the federal perspective. You know, I think this post-rescheduling, again, you know, this is not legalizing the industry as we know it. And I think that, the best we can hope for is guidance that lays out kind of what the federal government would like to see in state regulations, and then unfortunately it'll be state by state. And if you look back at the Obama era guidance, which is probably what we're going to see, something along those lines, it was called the Cole memo at the time. It just outlined very basic things like, we're going to respect state laws as long as they have measures in place that control diversion, sales to minors, that sort of thing. But I wouldn't see the federal government getting involved with regulations until we get some congressional action, because it's really going to be in the hands of Congress, I think, to do that.
Thank you. Did anyone else have anything to add? No.
Well,
I think
one
also,
thing-
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing. I do believe that, maybe just speak just to the child safety requirement. You can probably assume that that's going to be there. We are still, in the end, speaking to self-regulation, there's maybe one bigger piece to this is self-regulation is important. However, we are an intoxicating substance. This is a key point when it comes to how the regulations will be put upon us. And it would be prudent to, again, stay ahead of those things by engaging in things like child safety engagement and things like that.
Yeah, and I think the positive side of the rescheduling to level 3, of course, in the industry, people say like it's not good enough, but it's the first step. But if you're a cannabis business and you've made it this far with these strict regulations and really high taxes, if this goes into effect, you now have some savings coming from that you can apply to these changes that we're all talking about. Getting GMP certified is expensive. Getting a solid QMS, getting the right software is expensive. So if this ruling goes into effect and you have that kind of a bit more of savings that you can apply, then it would be a great step to get you into that, at least the first level of GMP.
I'll just add also that onboarding some of these systems, ERP or QMS, can be long and somewhat painful, and sometimes trial and error, picking on the right platform. So doing it now in advance while you have time, versus being under the gun to implement something, is highly recommended.
And one last thing, just to mention to that as well, with the cost and everything. GMP certification, I promise you, is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than a recall and the damage done to your company.
That's a great point. Thank you, James. All right, I think we have covered everything. Let me make sure. Yes, we've covered all of our questions. If anyone in the audience has a question they want to submit, please do so now. If not, I'll pass it on to Brian.
Yeah, great. We uncharacteristically ended a little bit early with such a huge panel. So I do have a few questions here in my back pocket that I think can sort of dive a little bit deeper into some other elements of the conversation. So want to open it up a little bit, building off of the first 4 episodes in this series that were headed by our Banking and Financial Services Committee, our Scientific Advisory Committee, our Facility Design Committee, and then our Marketing and Advertising Committee. There was a really big predominant focus on cannabis flower in a lot of the conversations. So I wanted to sort of open it up to the manufacturers here and see if there were any explicit regulations that they sort of anticipate as far as it relates to extracts and concentrates, and some of the unique challenges and opportunities, specifically focusing on this sector that they see coming down the line. Yeah, go for it, James.
Sure. Well, I have to preface this with I'm not a lawyer, in terms of the deep end of this conversation. There is a renewed interest in potency, or what we should be calling purity bans, state by state,
Yeah.
and there's momentum growing around that. In Colorado, we commissioned a very large survey, and we found that there were no high purity issues actually from the Colorado School of Public Health. But out of abundance of caution, we should ban these products anyways. Expect that to keep going. There's just not an understanding that dosage makes the poison. I could smoke 4 joints and get the same effect as 1 dab. So, communicating that and looking at the regulators and saying, yes, you're right, this isn't our grandparents' weed because we're not smoking a pile of biomass. This is maybe just a call to action and a call for, during your comment phases, as everybody knows, the DEA rescheduling comment period will be over on Tuesday. We're looking at this as essentially, do I want to go chew on a willow bark tree root, or do I want some aspirin? That these type of conversations will come up and people will say, because it is so unknown. It's not unknown. We've had hash for thousands of years. Just be aware that it'll be a state by state effort, but I would expect it to roll up into a larger federal movement to restrict higher purity products. And of course, the counter argument is, why do you want our product to be less pure? That's ridiculous. But those are my 2 cents on the issue.
So,
Go for it,
coming
Paula.
from the legal perspective. So in a way, potency doesn't matter as far as where you're going to be classified. And I say that because it really depends on what the Controlled Substance Act's definition of marijuana is, right? So, and we know what that is right now. It's, it's really anything that comes from the cannabis plant. And I don't do the manufacturing, so I'm going to make mistakes. Maybe you guys can jump in, but let me just set what it is. So it's the plant and the derivatives of the plant that are higher than the 0.3 THC level, right? That is going to be Schedule 3. So if you have an ointment or a topical and it falls in that, it is going to be Schedule 3, even though, yeah, maybe it really should be cosmetic, which is really not, it's not a scheduled drug. But, the DE, right now we know, so synthetic marijuana, which would ostensibly would be made by a pharma company, that's going to stay in Schedule 1, ironically, and then anything that is so marijuana extracts that are specifically excluded. Wait, okay. So if it's hemp as defined in the 2018 Farm Bill, it's excluded. So, probably if intoxicating hemp gets excluded from the definition of hemp in the Farm Bill, it'll probably be a Schedule 3 drug because it would fit the definition of a marijuana extract coming from a plant, a cannabis plant that has a greater than 0.3 delta 9 THC level, and it's no longer expressly excluded as being under the hemp bill.
Thank you, Paula. We actually got one more question. How are cannabis facilities handling environmental, health, and safety compliance?
I mean, I'll jump in real quick. I think from my experience, it's really a mixed bag, right? I've seen some have computer programs that are tracking all of their safety protocols, the training, compliance. I've seen people doing it on paper still. So, I think there's a lot of room for improvement and just room for maybe finding some really kind of like coalescing around some really good solutions.
Yeah, and I think even though, cannabis is its own industry, there's so many, OSHA standards or requirements from other industries that can be applied. If you're manufacturing, if you have a warehouse, there's already like general industry standards that you can and should be applying before something bad happens. We've already had, the event last year where someone died from pre-rolls and just had like actually, I think it was like an asthma attack, but they were working by themselves, which already there's an OSHA standard for that, how to prevent, like what dangers come from working by yourself, working in an isolated area. So I think that looking into those standards, even though they don't specifically say cannabis industry, looking at the general industry standards and seeing how you can apply those to your own facility is a great place to start.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for carrying on the conversation a little bit. We always really appreciate you all being able to field questions on the fly from our audience members and really ensure that these are engaging and interactive for all the members of the live broadcast. One thing that is become sort of a good key takeaway from this series, as this 5-part series has all been spearheaded by some of our most engaged committee members. I've loved closing out each of these sections by throwing it over to each of you all in turn to give a quick sort of testimonial to the audience members, to let them know what the importance of proactively participating in associations like NCIA and taking your involvement with an association like NCIA to the next level by, upgrading your membership or volunteering for a committee such as this has helped your bottom line and also helped advance the industry as a whole throughout your time here. I'll turn it over, I think, maybe to James, because most of the members of the CMC here have been some of my frequent collaborators that I've loved working with over the last few years. So why don't we start with James, and then we'll go over to Carla next.
Sure, Brian. Well, I've had the privilege of being on the CMC for a number of years now, and I really, really love this group. It is a federal focused organization that is handling the issues of Main Street cannabis issues. There are ways to engage at this level where it doesn't take $100,000 K Street lobbyist firm. We get in here, we talk about these issues together, we work on these issues together, and the fantastic GR team messages these issues together. Not to mention, I do have to say, I'm a huge fan of lobby days, getting out to DC with these groups and talking about this, being paired with people who speak the same language of you, brings an honest voice to the legislator of saying, we are on the ground, we're boots on the ground, we care about this is our heart and our passion. That carries a lot of weight, and this is a really great venue to do so. So I highly suggest everybody join here and participate. Don't just join, participate, get thoughtful, just sit in a couple times quietly, and then just start throwing concepts and ideas out there. I promise you they'll be accepted, discussed, and it helps the whole industry grow. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest, I guess, benefit is all the knowledge that you build through participating in these committees or in this organization. Because each state has to have their own set of regulations, it's really easy to just kind of get stuck in your own state and not really think outside the box. So coming into these meetings, we have monthly meetings, we have larger meetings, but coming into these and talking with people and seeing what they're doing and then getting new perspectives on how you can implement change within your own business has been super beneficial. And also just, when we have questions, you build such a larger network that it's no longer, oh no, what am I going to do? It's more so like, oh, I know someone I can reach out to. And that is everything in this industry.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you both so closely over the last few years. This is the second multi-part webinar series that you two have really spearheaded for us over the last year. So I really appreciate you all taking such a commitment and taking your participation to the next level. Let's continue to go around the panel here. Annamaria, why don't we turn it over to you next?
Yeah, as a newer member of the CMC, I think what I really noticed at first is just kind of the knowledge sharing, right? I think Carla just mentioned that, we're all kind of experts in different areas, but this way we can kind of share that knowledge and help fill in those gaps where maybe some of us aren't as strong. And then we just all become more well-rounded, right? We understand the issues surrounding cannabis and the current state right now. So, and I think also I want to point out that the work that we do is available for everyone. So people have questions about, how do we start all these GMPs? How do we do these SOPs? Well, stay tuned for more information that's going to come out of our committee, as regarding either future webinars or blogs that's going to go in more in depth, I think, on some of these topics.
Perfect. Well, let's continue to build on that with some representatives, some new committee members. Paula, let's turn it over to you. You hit the ground running when you just joined the CMC. So let's give the audience a little bit of a background on, what you've been doing so far and what you're hoping to accomplish with the committee for the remainder of the term.
Oh boy. Okay. So I've been here 2 weeks, right? It's 2 weeks.
And you're already speaking. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know what, to me, this group, it's just amazingly smart, engaged, available people. And, like everybody said, to learn from and grow with and share and, and build businesses together. So, I know I'm really looking forward to to, and I feel so honored that you've included me in like this too. So, and I assume it's like that for everybody. So it's just a great group to engage with, and I'm excited to be a part of this.
Well, all the kudos go to the amazing leaders of the Cannabis Manufacturing Committee for being so welcoming and having so many new members join and get immediately thrown into the fray. So really appreciate you being willing to participate as well. And Harrison, I definitely want to throw it over to you. We've had a great sort of working relationship over the last year or so. Custom Cones was an amazing collaborator and a content partner leading into all the 4 stakeholder summits that we kicked off the series with this year. You really did a great job diving deep into some of those state-specific regulations for some blog pieces that we were able to produce surrounding those events. So could you give a little bit more background on your experience sort of working within the NCIA membership orbit, what it's brought to Custom Cones, and what you all are hoping to continue to collaborate on with us over the coming year?
Yeah, definitely. They say you're only as smart as the people you hang around with. So being part of an organization like NCIA is exposing you to people that are thinking about these type of issues, working together and researching, the things that are changing. And in this industry, things are constantly changing. And by participating in teaching, you're also helping learn yourself. They say by teaching others, it helps like encode it in your brain and you're really learning it. So a big thing that we do as a company is always educate people through our blogs and videos. And we've been contributing to the NCIA blog on state-specific pieces around different regulations. A lot of it is packaging and labeling requirements, as well as testing regulations. So we did some for the first original 4 stakeholder summits, and then we're doing 3 more coming up. So stay tuned for those. And our company, Custom Cones USA, is all about spreading knowledge, teaching people about anything related to pre-rolls. So feel free to reach out. I'll drop my LinkedIn in the chat, and visit our website, and always feel free to reach out and ask any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Harrison. Really looking forward to the future collaborations as well. And last but certainly not least, Ben, I've had an amazing relationship working with you over the years within NCIA. You all were such an instrumental part of making sure our quarterly Cannabis Caucus events got off the ground by hosting us with one of our inaugural ones at Incubator or Gateway back in the day. And it's been really fantastic working with Vertosa on so many other educational offerings over the last few years. It really meant a lot to me to finally get you on the webinar program here. And as a representative of a board member who's really, had the journey from joining NCIA as a member and taking your participation all the way to the highest levels, could you give the audience members a few sort of key takeaways from your experience and what you as the vice chair of the board are hoping to accomplish with the remainder of your term?
Yeah. Wow. Appreciate that. It has been quite the journey. I think I first joined NCIA in 2015, which at that point we had Colorado and Washington with rec or adult use, and then we had the wave in 2016, which was really great. And then we had this period of time where it felt like it's like, okay, the industry was gaining traction, not a lot happening at the federal level. State by state, we were legalizing. And I think then the pandemic hit, and I think people got a little fatigued on it's like, wow, there's so much effort, nothing going on. And all of a sudden this year hits and it seems like everything is going on. And it's just really important for people to realize that they have a say in what happens, and like your voices matter, and to get involved. And James is right. Lobby days is my favorite time of year. If you do one thing with NCIA, I'd recommend going to DC and walking the halls of Congress with us. But our voices need to be heard. And that's what I'm super passionate about. And I really encourage everyone to get involved. Come take my seat. It's it'll be available eventually. But yeah, it's I love this association and just all the different members I get to meet through it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for bringing that home. Vertosa has been one of the companies that was instrumental in us restarting our annual lobby days following the pandemic. So thank you so much for your commitment and the gold sponsorship of last year's edition. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person again next May. So to close this all out and to tie this all together into the overall mission of NCIA and what we have been doing over the last 60 days during this public comment period and what we have planned for the remainder of the year to make the most of this really pivotal moment that we all find ourselves within, I'll turn it over to Aaron to sort of give us a quick lay of the land and close out the program.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks to everybody. And just following up on what Ben said, I mean, this industry is the success of our industry is so intrinsically intertwined with policy reform and advocacy. I mean, after all, the industry is federally illegal. And so, those of you who are participating and driving policy reform are, creating history and also making it possible for this industry to be able to, one day flourish. Those who not, I really don't, I'll say you might as well just take, if you're invested in the industry but not invested in policy reform, you might as well take your money and go to a casino, and just say, well, let's just hope NCIA succeeds and these other groups doing this succeed because I'm going to invest all this money in their success but not participate. So it's really important to participate. Otherwise, you're just gambling. Some of the things we've been working on are, making sure that, we got to the point to where we are today, where rescheduling is a very serious thing on the table. It's not necessarily a given, but we think it's likely to happen. It's been recommended by FDA. That's because of people like you and all of our members who have helped, make this issue, put this issue to the forefront, drive it to the forefront, make cannabis more mainstream than ever. We're at a point to where the president is talking about it in a State of the Union address. Never would have thought we'd seen that even a few years ago. But beyond rescheduling, there's a lot more that needs to happen. Rescheduling is going to resolve the 280E issue, pump, another $2 billion back into the industry a year. Wonderful thing, but it doesn't fix the banking problem. It doesn't allow interstate commerce. It doesn't make this industry legal and treated fairly under federal law in every other way. So we really need Congress to take action. Well, first we need guidance, as was mentioned, is something we're asking for to ensure that the FDA doesn't use its authority under the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act to start interfering with the industry, saying that, okay, well, you're now selling these products without FDA approval. That's a really important thing we're going to need to see. And I think we're going to get it. We're advocating for that from the administration. Also advocating in Congress for budget appropriations measures that tie the hands of the Department of Justice and the FDA so that they can't use tax dollars to circumvent state laws. Working, of course, on the Safer Banking Act so that access to capital and financial services becomes more equitable for the cannabis industry. And then ultimately working to regulate cannabinoid products, whether they be hemp-derived or marijuana-derived cannabinoid products, in a sensible manner at the federal level. Right now, it was mentioned there's a real disparity between hemp, which is underregulated, and marijuana that's overregulated. We need to level the playing field and create sensible regulations for cannabinoid products that we can build on and then create a national framework so that there's uniformity between the states, and then ultimately have interstate commerce. And all of that we're slowly building the support in Congress for these sorts of measures. We don't have but we do have the support for things like the Safe Banking Act. We don't quite have the support for the broader cannabis legalization regulation yet, but we're getting closer and closer every year. And that's because of the advocacy work we're doing. So I definitely want to encourage all the folks that are listening in to get involved. If you haven't been able to submit comments, please do that before Monday when the deadline is. Comments to the DOJ on rescheduling. We have a handy link at our website, thecannabisindustry.org, that'll give you a template and some talking points to submit those. Last we saw, there was something like 97% of the comments were positive, and there were tens of thousands of them. So let's keep that up. And also just get involved with the association. Go to our website, learn about membership, come to an event, and help make history with us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Aaron, for really tying all of that together, giving everybody a good understanding of what we have planned for the coming months and all the hard work that we're going to be engaging with on their behalf before hopefully all of you join us in Washington, D.C. next May to reinforce and get some of these things over the finish line. So as always, we're going to give you all a quick preview of some upcoming programs and activities that we definitely want you to mark your calendars for. The first of those being the stakeholder summits that we have made reference to throughout today's call. I'm really excited to officially announce that registration for our 4 stakeholder summits taking place across September and October has just opened up. Those are going to be taking place in Michigan, Ohio, New York, and Southern California. We've got a good gap in between all of these events to make it possible for you all to join us at all 4 if your business has a stake in each of these markets. It's definitely the premier event to connect with NCIA members, supporters, elected officials, and hopefully and specifically the chief regulators in each state. These events are going to be 3 hours long. They're going to be packed with panel discussions, intimate fireside chats, and live Q&A sections to make the voice of Main Street Cannabis heard directly by those decision makers. So make sure to mark your calendars. If you're an NCIA member, you get complimentary tickets to all of these events. So the best way for you to ensure access and guarantee your spot is to join NCIA today. All right. And with that, thank you all for joining us today for the 5th and final installment of our NCIA Industry Essentials webinar series that's falling within the public comment period. As Aaron mentioned, there is only 4 days left in that. So if you haven't, you will all be redirected to the public comment toolkit on NCIA's website as soon as we close this webinar out. So make sure to take 2 to 3 minutes or just use our template. Either or, take 2 to 3 minutes, customize it a little bit, and make sure that your voice is heard in this really vital and pivotal discussion. And then thank you once again, as always, to our expert panelists from across NCIA's membership, explicitly the leadership of the Cannabis Manufacturing Committee that spearheaded today's conversation. I really appreciate all of you all for your active participation throughout today's webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all on a future webinar later this month. So with that, thank you all so much. Enjoy our end of event credit sequence that highlights the 50+ member businesses that participated in today's call. And we'll see you all in another webinar soon. Thank you.